and welcome back to our general session track. Next up, we have a session titled UX and AI coming from James McGarry, Senior Director of Design at Fearless. Having worked at some of the world's top companies, James brings over 16 years of design leadership to the domain. Working with ML AI at companies like Intel, Dell, Facebook, and Kohl's, James is passionate about the nexus of data and humans. A part of the leadership team at the Fearless Group, James brings his visions for the future together with the world's top design talent to build the next generation of experiences. Please join me in welcoming James to the virtual stage.
Hey, I'm James, and today we're going to talk about user experience and AI. It's a really interesting piece, and we'll go a little bit around me, design thinking. We'll use some examples around pricing elasticity. We'll talk through the triple diamond concept, and then a little bit of what this means for the future. So before we dig into that, a little bit around who I am. So I've been doing design for quite a while at some really cool spaces, but more notably in the past, I've been working around machine learning and artificial intelligence for spaces like home streaming, retail, social media, and a couple other cool places. So been in and around the space of data science and design for quite a while now. But that's actually not where I started. So I got my start doing psychological operations in the Army Special Operations. A little bit of a different background, and I would carry titles like, special operator. But I would describe myself as a bit more of a designer, an aspiring developer, an engineer. The images we're looking at are actually some work that I've done through neuronatural linguistics and artificial intelligence to generate them. So I love that intersection of design and the way that we use systems to create it. Others might describe me some of the titles I would carry, someone with a traumatic brain injury or someone who's neurodiverse, but I actually just consider myself a dad, a partner, an innovator, and an outdoorsman first. So anytime we can get outside and do something, I'm all about it. So as we think about design thinking, let's maybe talk a little bit about what it is and why you should care. So design, if we think of it as the intermediary between information and understanding, I love that definition of it. It really maybe reframes it from something that we would see on a screen or something that might be a bit more artistic, and start to actually think about it as a process of a way to empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test against something that we're working to build. That's living in a ton of different formats. Everyone's got their way to do it, but if we could call it understanding, exploring, and materializing, we can get really into the minutia of what each of those steps are and the way that we would approach that from a process. But generally, it follows a generic kind of templatized idea of understanding what something is, trying to explore the problem, deciding which piece of that we want to try and fix, going after some possible solutions, and then testing them to understand how we would deliver it. So for the sake of this talk, we'll use this framework of kind of like exploring, deciding, testing, and then refining to think of design thinking. And if we start looking at that inside of retail, it might take on a different perspective of an end-to-end experience design than applying it to maybe more of a traditional UX screens type of concept. And it forces designers to think about things like price, availability, delivery, need, seasonality. What is the thing that someone's going to get as an end-to-end experience inside of a retail environment? And price actually becomes a really strong piece of that. And so we're going to talk through the example of using pricing elasticity as a way to maybe think of design thinking and intelligence to build something cool. But first, let's maybe kind of chat through what pricing elasticity as a concept from the design perspective is. And I'm not going to get super technical with it, but if we think about the things that impact pricing elasticity, it's really, is this a good price for a thing that I want to spend money on, or maybe not so much today? And so a promotion could impact that. Maybe the weather's actually impacting that. I'm on a vacation, it started snowing and I didn't prepare for it. I'm probably going to spend more money than I traditionally would buying something because there's a necessity that's taking place that's changing the way that I think about the price. And so that relativity of price gets impacted by multiple factors. but they do build an overarching experience in the way that we think about that. And so if we were to break that apart a little bit more, we could actually understand that the change in demand or quantity and the change in price affects the way at which something might be elastic or inelastic. And so if we get a little bit more technical against that, we can actually see that like supply has an elasticity, demand has an elasticity. They're both adjusted by the change in price over essentially the quantity or demand that something's going to get. And if we start plotting that, we can start actually understanding the way we can use that to adjust the way that we price and the way that we would build those experiences for someone to know, yeah, this is a great deal. And so if we plot them out, we can see that there is a specific response in the adjustment of the price versus the volume. So I could sell more units at a lower price. And I would increase the volume at which I'm selling it. However, my margins would be lower, or I can sell less units at a higher price and increase my margins. My volume may be off. And so depending on my supply or demand against that, I will be able to understand how I might want to price something. And so if we think about the way that we use pricing to achieve a specific sales or marginal goal, we can understand that the demand that something has, the way at which someone is going to interact with that price, and then the goals that we as a company have, we can start really picking apart which of these price points we would want to use and what kind of experience we'd want to build. So am I a retailer that's driving on significant volume? And so price is actually less of a factor in terms of creating my marginal goals, but it's definitely a factor in the motivation to buy. So I'm actually going to price things at a little bit of a lower point, and I'm going to sell at a higher volume. Then the other piece to this becomes my internal margins. So what is my cost to the item that I'm purchasing? So we can land on $22.99 seems like the optimal amount against the demand versus the price for my consumer market, and that builds the overarching experience that I have. Saying a ton of stuff, that's to price an item, which we can then now start doing for the rest of our products. And if I have two, I would go through that same process of understanding what's the market, what's the demand, how do I build that against it. But the more items I start growing inside of my catalog, the more complex this starts to get. And then eventually, if I'm running a very large, robust catalog, I'm repeating this process in order to ensure I have competitive pricing that achieve my business goals at a significant scale. And that's where we've seen a lot of retailers using the big data and machine learning to start aggregating all of the data points against that, collating them into ways that we understand the implications and impacts. But it's also moving forward to the next step, which is to actually start putting together a suggestion. And we're seeing AI for pricing as outputs becoming a really popular item inside of retailers, where they're actually taking apart those hidden layers of understanding, if I pick the price for option A, what are the implications against the other items inside of that? So if I have a fixture on a floor and I price half of the fixture at $70 and the other half of the fixture at $3, there's probably an implication to the way that someone would want to purchase against that. And so understanding how we balance those pieces and the changes becomes a really strong pinpoint in the way at which we start pricing and the way we're building models for that inside of retail. I apologize if that was rudimentary for a large, section of the audience. However, it does play an interesting fact when we start thinking through what we're actually looking at there. And if we think about that design thinking process, it was really explore, decide, test, and refine. That's essentially what's happening inside of the price elasticity models, where we're saying, hey, we want to explore what is the data that's available. We want to decide which pieces of that are relevant to us. We want to test that in a way we understand that what we did is correct, and then have a feedback loop for that to be able to change for the future, so we can try something different. And so if we actually change that to becoming design thinking and starting with the consumer first, we actually want to understand what is the problem that we're trying to solve. And if we layer in data analytics, we can start looking at what is the data points that we would have that we would be able to use to define that problem. And we can start mapping that in a way that we say, okay, we understand a little bit of what's going on here. We know what the outcome is, and we really see where this is going. And so we could package that up as data and user discovery. So we can start really thinking about why are we doing this before we figure out how we're doing this? Why are we trying to make decision A over decision B? and what's available in the way that we start thinking about the way that a consumer would interact with a product, or that the models that we're building from a data piece will actually drive a consumer or business outcome. And so we can then start really understanding, okay, we know why we're going to go after this, and we know really what we can work with. How do we start really digging into that? And so from an analytics perspective, we can start understanding, how do we get the information? How do we grab it to a space that works? From a design thinking perspective, we can start observing, where is this coming into play? How are people doing it today? Let's take our example of a merchant who's trying to price a product. Maybe they're in an Excel spreadsheet right now and they're doing this manually, and they're trying to switch to some format of automations. We need to really understand, like, what is the situation around this, and how can we really make sure that we're finding the right opportunities, and that we're actually building our products and our model development to address that. And that's really where we start understanding, like, what are the possible solutions for the things that we could do here? What are the entry points? And how do we know that we're achieving that goal that we've kind of offset with, of saying, hey, this is why we think we need to do this? We start understanding the opportunity points that would do that. And of course, that's where we can start building out some of our more specific use cases and proof points that we can start testing against, and saying, all right, if we prepare the data for this specific use case and we start ideating the way that that's going to be consumed from a consumer, in this context, it could be a user, but it could also be an API or a system that's consuming against it. And then how do we understand that we're synthesizing that in a way to say, this either did or didn't work, and so our feedback loops can move forward, so that we can then start refining against that, and we can understand that we have the proof of value, and we can start implementing and testing. And so here we see that, the data process and the design thinking process actually go hand in hand from the onset, to understand, what is the problem we're solving? How do we use the information we have on hand to solve against that? And then how do we test that it actually did the thing that we're doing? That sounded way too simple, and it's because it was. If we were to build a solution that easy and everyone loved it and it was immediate, that would be amazing. The reality is, though, is that there actually is a large change management element inside of this. We have to build a viable solution that also achieves adoption to drive real change. And that really comes from this idea of, like, trust, especially if we're moving from something that, we'll go back to our merchant who's doing it by hand. They are making risk assessments and adjustments by hand currently. We're asking them to forego that and actually trust the system to tell them what to then do. And so a lot of this comes through the way at which we're addressing usability consumer problems. Again, consumer can be a person or a system, but how do we trust that the output of it is achieving the goals at which we need? That design thinking piece actually structures it for change management. By observing what's happening today and preparing ourselves for how we would address that tomorrow, we can actually find ways to mitigate against building the most amazing proof of value model that doesn't actually have a usability component to it, that maybe negates trust. And so by really addressing the way that design thinking thinks about implementation in small segments and in this iterative process, we're actually able to drive against the way that people do this. And that's really just to get us to, like, there's a thing that we know that we want to do, we want to now roll it out. And so that rollout plan includes that usability testing. It includes building out the way that we're going to build these systems, adding scalability to it, something that we didn't discuss here, but it's a key component to the way that this can work, sustainability, as well as securities and all of the other pieces that come into this. And that's where the development process and cycle comes in play, building the trust and the confidence in the models, but also in the way that it would be deployed, and the validation that what has been deployed is a viable product that someone can use. And so if we think about the entire data lifecycle from discovery through rollout, we find that there's actually really interesting touch points across design thinking, and against the way that we use systems thinking or product development to say, this is the way that we want to build something that solves for a specific consumer problem, but it's actually built at the milestones needed to ensure that we're giving ourselves articulate time to build models that would be capable of sustaining this. I know that design with AI sounds like really cool systems telling us how to make amazing structures that we don't have to automate anymore, or excuse me, that we don't have to manually do anymore, that could become automated. We might think of it as, interfaces being built by systems or computers that are telling us how to adjust based on consumer need, or maybe they're adapting automatically to a specific environment or a screen. Maybe it is something along those lines. I actually think it's a bit closer to using design thinking with data analytics and artificial intelligence as a way to superpower the solutions that are delivered. It's a tool that can be used in the way that we're solving human problems and allow us to really drive against those in a super, super cool way. So if we start thinking about designing with AI, I hope that maybe we think about it as designing with AI as opposed to designing for AI. And so it becomes design thinking as a process in the way at which we move forward. I want to hopefully the one thing that you can take away from this is that we're super early in figuring out what this is from a design perspective and the way that we're using data for consumer problems. We're at the forefront of it. However, I hope that we think of design maybe as something a bit different in the future, of design thinking being more than just design. We didn't actually talk about screens. We didn't talk about the interfaces for pricing tools. We didn't talk about the way that someone would understand and consume the output of a model that gives them a pricing piece. We actually talked through a bit more of how we approach problem solving for something as complicated as what price point do I put across my ecosystem in store, online, and the way that I'm selling to achieve my business goals, as a specific problem that we use design thinking to approach in the way that we would want to build against that. And so this really forces specifically retail and progressive moving products that are more than just screens, for designers to think beyond the screen and to be a part of understanding how do things actually work from a programmatic perspective, but also from a model development perspective and the life cycles perspective, to know where and how to drive that change management, ensure we're solving consumer problems through it. So I'm currently at the Fearless Group, where we design a better world, and we're really chasing after that in the way that we structure. And so we are actually three unique companies. One is a talent partner to help the way that we grow businesses inside of design and design thinking. We're a full service design agency solving global challenges at scale. And then we're built on a community of people represented from just about every continent and every portion of the world, where designers come together to solve really amazing problems and to do something different. Thank you so much for your time on this. Looking forward to catching up with you. Please reach out and connect, and looking forward to the discussion that will take place in the Q&A.
Wow, what a great session. Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please make your way to your next session. Also, don't forget to check out the networking, accept your connection request, and explore the AI exhibits. Have a great time.